Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today. My name is Karen Peterman, and my colleague Allison Blackmeyer and I were ARIS Fellows in 2021. This video series shares some of our work. I'm joined today by Travis Tangen, who was also a 2021 ARIS Fellow. Travis focuses on research impacts at WRF Discovery Connections in partnership with the University of Wisconsin. More importantly for today's conversation, Travis is a bit of a wizard in Airtable, and he's going to share some of his wizardry with us today. So Travis, thanks for joining me.
Oh, yeah, glad to be here. Part of that wizardry, maybe, I don't know if it's official or not, but I've got an old school Nabby t-shirt on. So I think it's just super powered with the superpower ring, kind of like Iron Man.
Came to represent.
We've moved over to Airtable a couple of years ago, and it's been working out really well. In terms of the data that we're collecting, I'll do a quick screen share here and show you some of those elements. Hopefully you're peeking in, you see all these different things that we're collecting. And it's really around a common thing of understanding impact, identity, mission, goals of partners, being informed and being centered by community voice. And as part of that, you see all these links back and forth. But really, it looks way more crazy than what it really is. So if we zoom into some of these elements here, we can kind of just go left to right. We've got some common things around understanding our researchers, graduate students, postdocs, PIs, and faculty and their projects and grants of how they would work through and standard email role and school, college, those type of things. And then for each one that has a project, so projects are things that are either funded or in progress, a formalized relationship. Then we've got a lot of different connections that really relate to, maybe the NSF abstract, the details of start and end date, what kind of community members might be a part of that, that type of thing. And I want to really make sure that we see a key part of our database is really understanding our partners, our community partners. I mentioned before that we really like to ground our work in this centering of community voice. And that happens through including them in the same way that we would a researcher in terms of mission alignment, values alignment, their impact identity, things like that. So, and then we got lots of logistics on there as well.
Can you talk a little bit about when you see those connections light up in your architecture, what that really means and what that allows you to do that just a standard Excel database wouldn't?
Yeah, totally. I think I'm going to dive into another view because we'll be able to see it a little bit, I think a little better here.
Awesome.
So let me do that for you. Now, this is what do we call our researcher database, our contact database. And the nice thing is, once you have your main field of your researchers there, you have the other spaces that are already linked on there. So for example, we're working on a project with an electrical engineering professor. We can open up and things link and map across from the different projects, the different workshops. So if I want to find out more about any of these things, I could just click on there. And it kind of, everything's nested within there. It's like, you move one thing out and you can open up and find out a whole new world within there. So the links are intentionally designed, whereas like in Excel, this would just be maybe a number field or a text field. It wouldn't link to its own sheet or table or however you might fill that out. So that I think is a huge value for us of just being able to have all the different data in one space and understand who else is on, for example, a graduate student and who's their PI, or the opposite way, a PI who's on their lab team. We used to be a bit more in isolation for those type of things, but now we can really dive in and understand the connectedness. And that's a big thing for us to be able to do a better job to have quality programming.
Let's dive in to some specifics. Okay. So you obviously are collecting a tremendous amount of data. on a whole host of things. So talk to us a little bit about the most important types of data that you collect, and then maybe walk us through a typical use case for those
Cool.
data.
Yeah, definitely. I think what we've grown to really understand is we need to not do stuff first, we need to learn stuff first. So what do we mean by learning stuff? It is really a parallel piece of the researcher's impact identity, and that could be them as an individual PI and working as a mentorship program with their graduate students, postdocs. But in parallel, and as valuable, if not more valuable, is our partnership connections. So once that research identity is informed on one side, the other side needs to have a connection, and it doesn't matter which one goes first, right? The partner, community partner, could inform a researcher's impact identity connection because they've been looking for something for so long. So that's mapped out in our process now. We have a program that allows for the stages of the projects, and I can maybe show you what that looks like. And we kind of level up and do a lot of that custom connection between what a impact match will be. So here's an example of that, where we have things in kind of a walkthrough where we can see our partners and our programs, and these things are in progress. So some of these are proposals that we're putting in, and others are funded, and we can kind of see if they have support or not. Others are different kinds of project pieces, and that becomes particularly important for us because we want to make sure that we're really aligned. And there's something really cool that Airtable developed just a little bit ago. It is kind of a natural reporting space that we've been using a lot to develop a sense of the big picture items, so how many people and programs and things like that, and where are they happening? And this is more traditional stuff, which is nice. But we've been able to really move into another topic. I wanted to get to this space of telling stories after we move through an event to make sure we're aligned again to partnership attributes of this is what we want our youth to experience. This is our mission and goal for our community program. So we have a lot of that kind of built in, and the images for each one are connected there. We have the PI and the graduate students that are participating, but we can open it up to the community center and see where this community center has participated in our events as of late. They're all listed out there. Each of them has catalogs and details. And then we also have a section where they can help us to be aligned to their mission and goals.
I want to circle back to the storytelling piece for a minute, because I think one of the reasons that Allison and I talked to you initially is that we were interested in how people were telling the story of the work that their research impact or broader impact office was doing. And so can you talk a little bit about when you tell stories, are you telling the stories of the work that your team is doing to support this huge list of initiatives and this huge list of researchers, or are you telling the stories of events, or are you doing a little bit of both because of how the system is set up?
Yeah, I think that's reflective of who we're talking to. Stakeholders in general will have more of those big picture type of views, and will nest in one or two stories to elaborate kind of like, hey, here's a big picture. This is what one of those elements looks like. And our director, Laura Heisler, does a lot of that work with our stakeholders. In terms of our community partners, it's been so valuable to have stories of our historic, current, and hopefully projected future participation to give a sense of, building upon trust and community centering again. We can show how our group is valuing that directly through our storytelling. I was like, hey, this is what this looked like, as opposed to, in some cases just saying, hey, we were hanging out at the community center 7 times last year. Well, what does that really mean? So just having some pictures, some anecdotes, having the other information at the fingertips to talk about, hey, this is an NSF funded project. For the community center, that's helping to shift different conversations and their staff. And we've had some great, it was actually one of my parts of our ARIS Fellows project that we're putting together, just talk about guiding voices and understanding, this idea, how can you be NSF ready as a community partner? So having the stories of what this looks like for an NSF broader impacts project really shifts some of those opportunities for our partners in the community center. And we're seeing that with future projects, hopeful projects that are more centered, even more centered. Like this is, the leading voice from a community-based organization, and we are following their lead. So that would be a different storytelling. And the last one I'll just mention is for our staff. My goodness, our team gets to learn about what one another's doing in a new way. And we have a common sense of continuous improvement. So even though we have so many projects, STEM identity, STEM practices, like what was happening with those two elements? What do those look like? How did that happen? So that is our impact identity that we want to always have that alignment to, and how we're building partnerships and helping to support research impacts, projects, grants, etc.
Nice. I like how you just framed the alignment between the impact identity of your team and the impact identity of the work that you're trying to support, both in the community and in your university community, but then in the broader community as well, as those kind of core elements that you're all focusing on together. Can you talk a little bit about, this is a tremendous amount of data, right, that you have access to. So can you walk us through, for like a particular event, who collected which pieces of data, what the data entry looks like, when and how you all come together as your team of 11 to review what's in the system, what's missing, like what's the whole process for that like for your team?
Yeah. Yep. So getting into the practical elements, I like that. Do another screen share. So we tend to have kind of a 2-week outlook on what's happening. So there are standard calendars that kind of take a peek at that. So we've got different, I gotta make sure I get the right calendars up here. So another thing is that we're seeing here, I have to maybe edit that. We've got all these different views well, it's not a bad thing to show. We've got all these different views in Airtable that can restrict your access. So maybe you're like a lead on just one type of program and you just want to see that program. You can easily create versions of what you see. So there's so many great filters that way. And those are called views in Airtable. So I was looking at a view that didn't have all our events on there. They're just kind of nested. But this is what we do on a Monday. And then individuals can follow through on a Thursday. We look, hey, what's today? We've got a couple of weeks coming up. You can go in there, get the basics of the start and end date, excuse me, and then you can go in and add some details. All right, what is this event? It's a professional development. Where is it? Who's going to be there? What research materials might be there? And so we just click on all these things, and it's quite a simple project. We go through, we have everybody in a database here. We can type their name, and then if it's the right fit for, I've already got that one in there. If it's a right fit for a project, this one is actually part of that project too. We can add it in there, and we do that as we're setting up events and then post event to know how many people were there. We have a thing for planning for staff availability too on events to know who's there. Just down the road, let me put some pictures into for what that event looked like. This was a teacher convention event that we did for science teachers. We do the same for all types of events. So whether it's a workshop, an after school, club, all these things have a similar process of moving through what our community partners are, the addresses, et cetera. And then that allows us to really stay in flow around some of those conversations that you might just miss. It's like, oh, I wish I would have told you that, or I wish I would have known about your participation at that event, because I'm also working with that researcher in XYZ. That, not I'm saying goes away completely, but oh my gosh, it's so much more synergized. So I find we're getting more efficient because we're just collaborating within our team and with our partners better. We're more on the same page. more often. And again, it's not perfect. I don't mean to say that. We still like, oh my gosh, we still do some of those things, but we're getting there.
And it strikes me that this database also is a tremendous service that your team can provide back to your scientists, having access to all of these stories that live in this database and the ability to call them up when you need them. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about your team's role in helping other people tell stories, not just the stories that you tell directly about the work that's happening?
100%. I mean, that was, part of the selfish motivation too, is how can we do better at generating reports in real time, having things that, it takes a long time to craft a history of 3 months, 6 months, what happened in the last year if you're doing a report. So we wanted to value our partnerships with researchers, especially. This is more frequent right now, and we can easily generate them. We click on, I can show an example here. We'll click on a researcher and we'll be able to share screen again here. Cool. So what we have on our database, just a list of individuals here, and I can search out an individual, find them on here, a big field here. Once we get to that space, we'll connect up, and usually I'll just generate a print report. It's one way to do it. Generate the report there as a PDF, and we will get the whole list of events, trainings, and we can set the dates and parameters and where they worked. And then we have some impact measures as well, little text pieces, pictures, and all that kind of stuff. So each one of these nests here will open up and has photos of the events, and we have evaluation data and reports too that would be as part of that. So that part of it is super great to have kind of like a relationship matrix. I think it's just better understanding our work too every time we do that, of looking at which lab cultures, not in the bacteria sense, but like the culture of the lab, connects and aligns with our program. We really start to see some of those points of connected spaces around, again, impact identity, STEM identity, boom. And then, hey, I want to say, what's my life like as a scientist? What's my life like as an engineer? And who am I as a human, right? Like, take the engineer part out. Like, those are things that we see a lot in these collection of people through the researcher database. So that's helpful for us too.
Yeah.
It's not just about collecting all the data. I think the essential part that we've learned is this can't be an after the fact thing. This has to be embedded into the workflow to work really well. And so we've really transformed our team. Our team's around 11 individuals total, with event staff and amazing individuals at different kind of focal points, from field trips, summer camps, working directly with researchers, developing their plans. But now we have a common place that we can tell stories together to see how all those parts are fitting together. Mm-hmm. But it fits into our process. It's not something somebody does on their own. We have our Monday and Thursday meetings that have part of this reporting out and share outs and things like that.
So the way you describe it makes it seem like it is just integral to how your team interacts with one another. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you got to that place, because it is a new system and people generally don't like systems like this at first, I think, until they see the power of what it can bring. And so can you talk about like what that transition was like for you all, and getting it into kind of the mindset and the standard operating procedures for 11 people? That doesn't seem like a small feat to me.
No, it's being true to how people work, who they are. So having that flexibility to find a new pathway. So an example is like we embed things within our Microsoft Teams now. We just started that. So we take these elements of Airtable and we have some spaces that makes that easier there. Another real example that's been a change is calendaring in Outlook. So we used to calendar in Outlook all the time. We can sync so that we see the Airtable stuff in Outlook. but we were doing it duplicative, and it's like, that doesn't make any sense, right? So how can we transform our process so that everybody starts at Airtable? And that was a big deal. And now once that happens, that makes everything else easier, because we can have tentative events that are informed now from the community first. And this is a big deal. So they can say when, where, what, why, and how, and we can put them in as tentative. And then we can find a researcher match. Historically, we did it the other way. We're having an after school program Monday from 3 to 4 p.m. Does that work for you? If it doesn't, so the ability now, and we've done a lot of that custom work, the things you don't see on a website of an organization. I know everybody's got those high value partners that they do a lot of that work with, that doesn't maybe get recognized. But we hope that will become our norm, is that really community-centered programming can happen through there. But that starts with the logistics of being able to go to the community, have them represented on our calendar, for example, and then having our staff availability. All right, who might be available for that? And then having, another one of our team of 3 and others that work together to make the researcher connection, project connection. So that's really changed our workflow. But when it gets to a point where you see a case study that worked, that's where it becomes okay. It's like, oh, I see this now. Yeah. But there is a time period of just building trust within your team that takes some work and patience, and knowing that it's not going to be perfect. The people matter more than the database, whatever you use, Airtable or other thing. It's, how you work with one another. That's the most important.
Yeah. I wanted to circle back to your idea of continuous improvement. And as an evaluator, I love this concept, as you might guess. And particularly the idea that if you're not using data, that you probably shouldn't be collecting them anymore. And using them might just be you learn something new. That counts as use. How often is your team sitting together looking at this huge architecture that you have built and thinking about, okay, is there anything in here we can get rid of to streamline this system so that we know we're spending time on things that matter and not wasting time on things that don't?
Yeah. So we have a smaller team. I actually have a couple of sub teams that kind of do some of that work. We call it, triage within the process of data collection, looking for duplication, things like that. When you have multiple editors and collaborators, things emerge. It's like, oh my gosh, parallel evolution, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a weekly meeting, and that's part of the agenda. And then we haven't yet sorted out like when we're going to move as a, it's going to be a quarterly review or something like that. But so the nuances we still are working on. This is not a finished project. I'd say we're feeling great about where things are, but we're not happy. We're 50%, happy, and 50%, we're optimistic, but. So we know that there's a lot of work to do there. And I think the struggle is, how can a small group of people, so there's not decision fatigue or, make some of those choices informed by everybody's communication. So it's almost like we need 3 or 4 weeks of using the data in a process and then realizing, okay, let's go back to those 3 or 4 weeks. What was useful? What was purposeful? And then looking ahead to some of those reporting milestones around fiscal reports and calendar year reports. We know some of those pieces need to be there. And then we triage and we change it up. We do it real time during meetings, or we give each other tasks to do that. So that's how we keep things kind of healthy, so to speak, the database healthy, as much as we can.
Great.
And evaluation too. I'm sorry, I can dive into a screen share. No, I just, so here's one example of evaluation of some qualitative data that we've kind of grouped out. And this one is particular around our camps, but it's just collecting some of that anecdotal information, historical information around all of our alumni of our camp. And we're able to code things out really nicely, so that we can quickly kind of filter things out and add conditions. So if we're in a meeting and we want to find out what pieces had information around STEM identity, we can connect it out, boom, and it changes. What about STEM identity of scientists and my own STEM identity? And then we can go through and did that have STEM practices? So now all of a sudden, what we've got on here is a list of that data that fits those parameters. And there's other parts in there.
Wow.
So that changes our conversation like super quick, right? In a meeting. That type of ability to bring up things live is something we, again, aspire to have across the board, and even having a quantitative measures for each event. So instead of attendance, you have attendance plus what is the measure of STEM practices, in a quantitative form from an observational protocol. And then what is a measure of STEAM identity? Assuming that both those things are attributes based on the research, informed by research that's validating kind of those two elements as key, along with building relationships long-term. Those are elements we want to measure so that we can say, oh my gosh, we're doing it here. What can we do differently here? So that's again, aspirational, that we're getting started with that. And hopefully it'll be as normal as writing the attendance in the future.
Yeah. And I would imagine the coming together around a couple of key outcomes that are core to your work is really important for how you use this system, because you need to be asking the same kinds of questions across lots of different outreach events, so that you can then use the power of this system to look at where you're really knocking it out of the park, and places where maybe you want to think about, okay, like our summer camps aren't doing as well in relation to this one aspect of STEM practice as we want them to. And so what does that mean? And so I love the ability to look at the kinds of activities that you have, the kinds of data you're getting, and the match to the outcomes you're striving for across the entire system, instead of on a project by project or event by event basis. That's lovely.
Yeah, and that's huge for us. I mean, that, again, like I said, partitioning the traditional databases, opening that up so that they can crosstalk. What is the common way that they're going to crosstalk? STEM identity, STEM practices, and from both sides too, from the researcher building about an opportunity to bring about their identity into the process, as well as the participants, the youth scientists, adult scientists, other policymakers, seeing themselves in science is really important.
Yeah.
So we want to try to measure that across the board, and we think those common themes will allow that.
So thinking about everything that you all have learned throughout this whole journey of starting with things that weren't Airtable, and over time kind of growing into Airtable as the right way for you to think about organizing your work now, what do you think is the most important piece of advice that you have to offer for people who are watching this today?
Yeah, so I thought about that question a bit. It's hard to put things into buckets, right? Like the most important, but I kind of identified three things that I think are transformative might be the right word, but purpose was one. What is the purpose of the data? Is it going into a black hole, so to speak, and not coming out? If we're not using it within our continuous improvement, around our stakeholder engagement, around our partnership, alignment, like to inform others as part of our email communication, our proactive approach to let people know that we're aligning to goals, and we should not do it. So it's like, what is the purpose behind it? Some of those are aspirational at this point as well. We're building out things that we know we'll have some emerging ideas, especially around industry academia partnerships and tech commercialization. We want to get a better sense of that sort of research impact space. So we're starting some work in that. But that's the purpose of it, right? So we start out and we find out disclosures and patents and licensing things, and then we align that with all our other pieces around event participation, grants, and trying to put that picture together. So, we see where that's going. To inform our work, and at minimum it's around continuous improvement, right? Making sure we're aligning our goals there. So that would be one, the purpose. The next one that I have on here is just don't be afraid to go out there and try it out and trash it too. Like there's been so many times that we've built something that's like pretty darn good, and then it gets to that point of like, how often are we using this? Like, what is it there for? So there's just like, get rid of it, boom, done. not using it there. And then, being bold in that space, I think, once you have that initiative to go out there and not be afraid to take a risk, to spend some time to fit it into your workflow. I think that is one of the harder things. It's just like we're bringing this new process into an existing workflow. And it seems really simple to transform that, but there's a lot to be said to have a team-based approach to that, to have people feel comfortable being messy, so to speak, and not certain about what to do. That takes some time to transform, our process, but just acknowledge that from the start, that you're not quite doing the analogy of building an airplane as you're, flying it, but you're trying to find out the purpose of whatever vehicle you're making and making sure that that thing that you're collecting is helping you to do that. And so that is something that, again, is informing our process, but our process is informed by how we're collecting data and what we're needing to make sure we're on the same page on. So team-based piece would be a huge thing. Don't do this individual. It's probably too much work.
Travis, thank you so much for the tour of all of the amazing work that you guys are doing. If you have questions for Travis that you didn't hear answered today and you want to get in touch, you can see his contact information on this slide. If instead you have questions for me or questions for Allison, please reach out to one of us as well. Thanks for watching.